Today we're talking GM tips, and we're going to be getting into the basics of D&D Homebrew. Welcome to Nerdarchy, for nerds, by nerds. I'm Nerdarchy Dave, and as usual I'm hanging out with this nerd.
Nerdarchy Ted.
You want more D&D advice and tips, make sure you hit that subscribe button.
But don't forget that notification bell, or you'll miss our videos in your YouTube feed.
If you are a regular viewer of our channel, you might notice our videos look a little different than usual during our Dungeons and Social Distancing edition of Nerdarchy. It's because we are just trying to practice social distancing, keep away from each other, and stay safe, and we hope you are doing the same. As soon as things allow and the quarantine ends and lockdown is over with, we'll get back to our normal format. Until then, we are filming virtually. So with that, we're going to jump into our video.
But before we get into our regular content, we got to thank our sponsor, and for this one it's going to be 1985 Games. They've got a current Kickstarter for the Cursed Lands. These tiles are awesome. They're cardboard, but they're double-sided. You can use dry erase markers on them. They wipe off clean and clear every time. I've been using their stuff for a while. I got their first box, and immediately I realized this was completely filling a need that I had for my DMing. The fact that they are cardboard, the fact that they're double-sided, they travel well, they fit into your bag easily, so wherever you're going, you can just easily grab the things that you're going to need for your session, or heck, get it all, put it in one little box, and you've got it set to go. They've got numerous terrain, they've got tokens, but all this stuff is double-sided. With the Cursed Lands, they got a wall pack, so if you've got, an invasion that's going on, the wall pack can be flipped over, as you see in the video on their Kickstarter, that shows the wall has been breached, so the monsters can be able to slip through. I can't speak highly enough about the dungeon tiles by 1985 Games.
Yep, you're going to be able to jump on that Kickstarter and get the Cursed Lands or the Castles and Keeps, or possibly both. They are killing it. They've crushed their goal. Stretch goals are going to be unlocking and opening up, so you're going to want to check it out. Link in the description below.
And last thing, if you happen to be a dice collector, they do have an obsidian die that's part of certain pledge levels, so you might want to go get in on that.
All right, Ted, let's start off with, what is Homebrew?
So Homebrew is basically anything that's really going to be, not official. We talk about D&D for the most part on this channel, so if it's not really made by Wizards of the Coast, it's kind of, falls into that Homebrew category.
Yeah, any third-party publisher is making essentially their Homebrew and selling it to you. We do the same thing, but not only that, though, like if you download free stuff or if you just make it in your own game, that's all Homebrew, and there's nothing wrong with it. We generally use more Homebrew than anything else in our own games. We may take, bits and pieces from official adventures and modules, but for the most part, we don't run through those, so everything we do is Homebrew. We don't use official Wizards of the Coast campaign settings. We use our own campaign settings that we make up, so all of that would be considered Homebrew.
I'm very fond of making my own monsters. As I've said, many times on our videos, I run with, veteran players. They've got access to all the books that I do, so I try to make up my own stuff. I use building blocks based on, pre-written adventures or, already created monsters, and then I, bend, twist, mold, change, so that in the end, what I'm putting out there is my own creation, but it's built on that basic foundation of, the core rules.
So why would you even want to do that kind of stuff? Why do you even want to Homebrew, Ted?
I want them to be surprised. So this is a way that you get to explore creativity. As I've been playing so long, I enjoy making monsters. I enjoy making my own magic items. So by being able to explore my own creativity and showcasing that with the players that are at my table, I get to explore, that side of myself.
Yeah, definitely exploring creativity is a great thing you can do in the game, especially when you start homebrewing stuff and making your own rules, making your own monsters, magic items, whatever you want to add to the game. And there's a lot of different ways you can do it. Some people don't have creative outlets, but for them, D&D is a creative outlet. Telling these stories is a creative outlet, and creating, new elements to the game that haven't been created before. But that's only one reason, or two, I should say, at this point, because we have surprising your players, exploring creativity. Sometimes you might do it to solve a problem in your game.
You want to explore that, Dave?
Yeah, for instance, if there's a specific scenario you want to run, but there's no existing rules for it, it causes you to make it up. Maybe you want to make up a magical condition or effect that takes place in your world because of story reasons, story elements. But Wizards of the Coast hasn't made that yet. So you can either not do it or you just make it up for yourself, fulfilling that need. Another thing might be maybe there's a specific paladin order in your world and now the player wants to actually be part of it. Well, that could very well be its own oath. So now you have to create a whole subclass for the paladin so that the players can play it. So you're fulfilling a need and you're doing it out of necessity.
I actually know several players, and there's probably loads more out there, that they do that in their world. If there's a domain that a cleric wants to have access to that there aren't rules for, oaths that aren't there, I've actually helped create a domain for a player or a fan. So it's definitely a lot of fun, a lot of things going on. But it doesn't necessarily have to be a problem that this solves in your game. It could be a problem with the rules as well. I know 5th edition is definitely a little touch and go when it comes to certain things. There's specific rules for some things, but it's very vague in another. Perhaps you don't like that, and you want something a little bit more concrete for something specific. So you can homebrew your own rule or set of rules for those scenarios. I know with our games, there's a number of rules that we don't particularly care for. First one that comes to mind is the Dragonborn's Breath Weapon. Maybe early on, it being a standard action to use doesn't seem, all that much, but by the time you get to higher levels, you can do so much more with your action. Standard cantrips get to be so much more powerful than what the breath weapon does. So we said from moment one, the Dragonborn's Breath Weapon is a bonus action. Move on.
So there's another thing that happens too that we kind of touched on without saying it, is by homebrewing stuff, you kind of begin personalizing your campaign setting and your game by incorporating these rules that don't exist anywhere else. Also, the idea of fixing rules as written that you don't particularly like, it could be really simple, like Ted said with the breath weapon thing. But what about you want to introduce psionics into your game, but you don't like the fact that magic and psionics operate exactly the same way, and you want them to be different? That could be a very easy thing where you split them apart and they don't interact with each other. Would be a good example.
I completely agree. So, I've already mentioned a little bit, but, on a broad sense, how does Nerdarchy handle homebrew, Dave?
So one of the ways we do is, like Ted said, making our own monsters. But I use the word making our own monsters loosely. Sometimes we will take a monster that has a set of abilities that we like, or several monsters, and just mash them together and describe it differently. Really, it's just a carrion crawler, but we describe the monster as looking different. It's humanoid. Instead of having a face full of tentacles, they come off of its body or its arms or whatever. The player has no idea that this is really just a carrion crawler that we modified a little bit. And maybe you then just take another monster's ability and add it to it. It's a really fast, dirty way of creating brand new things in your game from the player's perspective, but all you really did was mash up some existing things or make them look a little bit different than they did before, but it's still essentially the same.
Nerdarchy has said, from, pretty early on, steal from everywhere. And that includes within, the core rule set. But, we look to be inspired. I am always, reading something, watching something, or, just when I'm out and about and I notice something that's, slightly, fantasy or D&D-esque, I'm like, okay, well, how could I use this in my game? So I'm constantly taking, notes on my phone or, in a Google Doc to just be like, hey, look, I want to use this for D&D. How do I go about doing it? So get inspired by these sources that you see. And even if they are not remotely, look at the concepts that they're using, relationships, locations, what have you, and take those things and see, how you can homebrew that for your game, for your world.
Now, homebrewing can be a bit of an art more than science at times, so you're going to have to do some experimenting. Things that looked good on paper may not play out the way you think. They might be too weak, they might be too strong, so you may have to walk things back, you may have to change things, which is no big deal. Usually on the DM side, it's really easy to fix. On the player side, you might need to have a discussion with your players. And also when you're introducing new things into the game, especially on the player side, let them know that it might change depending on how it plays, or you might even just let it go. But for the next time it gets used, you might make some tweaks. It's a bit of a learning experience. If you like this video about homebrew, we have another one where we do some homebrew in our own world. Clockwork King, Clockwork Dragons, and Clockwork Kingdom D&D world building. Check it out up here.
So if you want to check out our homebrew content, we make 5e content for players and DMs alike every month over on our Patreon. So until next time, stay nerdy.